everybody. We are here with a new session of our EEO conversations. And today we have the pleasure to host Rachel Murch, that today is a co-founder and principal advisor at Manak Group. But before that, spent quite 10 years at Zappos, working on some of the topics that we are going to explore today. Rachel, welcome and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's our pleasure, I would say. Why don't we start with a couple of words about yourself, what you are doing today, but also your focus for the last 10 years at least, or probably more. And let's say, what is Zappos? Why you spent 10 years at Zappos?
That's a great question. So in 2010, I had already been with a utility organization for 9 years. So very traditional, very top down. I like to say that I kind of grew up there. I learned a lot about what I liked and what I didn't like. And then the opportunity at Zappos presented itself. At the time, I was working on helping people through system implementation. So from a technology standpoint, whether it was systems that were developed in-house or off the shelf, just the using the systems and the processes and the change that comes along with that. As you probably know at Zappos, lots of things change. Your question about why I spent or how I was able to spend 10 years there is really because I had so many different opportunities to do different work and meet new and interesting people. I also had the opportunity to pave my own way. So in starting, my career at Zappos in technology, I was then able to branch into organizational design and changes and new initiatives. So as Zappos and Tony specifically got more interested in new ways of organizing and the management science, if you will, that really, really sparked my interest. And I always wanted to help people, just be the best that they can be and do the best work that they can do. And I wasn't really sure at the time how to do it. So I got to experiment a lot and learn from him and learn from a lot of other people outside the organization. We just got to try a lot of different things. So it was motivating and it was exciting and new and different. So when I look back and go, wow, it was that long, it really didn't seem that long.
I guess that everybody knows Zappos experience, but let us rephrase it just for the few that may not. Zappos has been acquired by Amazon for $1.2 billion. It was originally an online shop for shoes, but then it really take a life of its own thanks to Tony Hsieh that unfortunately passed recently. And what Tony and the team did was really exploring the frontiers of new ways of organizing, taking inspiration from things just holacracy, but also from other even more extreme approach that we're going to discuss. So our interest today is at understanding a bit more about this journey, and maybe we can start from the rationales. Why? Tony was an amazing human being, very curious, a very brave leader. But what is the business driver, the strategic questions for which this organizational exploration has been done in Zappos?
Well, you mentioned that Zappos started as selling shoes online, so it's a e-commerce organization. That being said, we identified as a customer service company. So, our way of describing the organization is we're a customer service company that just happens to sell blank. So it started with shoes, it evolved into apparel and jewelry and handbags and sporting equipment and all kinds of things. And and as you mentioned, was acquired in 2009. So founded in 1999 in San Francisco, moved to Las Vegas in 2004 because that seemed to be where people could make a good living and do customer service as a career. So that was the most important thing. And then in 2009, acquired by Amazon. And I think at the heart of the organization, we just really wanted to deliver amazing customer service. The number one core value at Zappos is to deliver wow through service. And that lent itself to Zappos becoming whatever organization it needed and wanted to become based on the passion and interest and competencies of the people inside of the organization. And that was Tony's whole philosophy, is he wanted to build the greenhouse for all of the plants to grow. And that's what, adopting some of the organizational structures such as holacracy and others moving forward. And we ended up designing our own, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. That's what that was, is designing the structure for the plants and the people to grow.
And I think we are already seeing a pattern here. The organization as an instrument for the business, and the business as an instrument for, if you want, a greater good. So for something that is not just making money, but delivering happiness in this case. And it sounds a bit crazy, maybe, because you are an e-commerce and you want to deliver happiness. But I know a number of stories about Zappos really making the difference for people. Is this coming from some common principles, values, even before then practices? What is sitting at the core of this vision of the world that Zappos and Tony brought in?
Well, related to values, Zappos is really all about their 10 core values. So to speak to the Zappos core values, number one is to deliver wow through service, but there's other ones such as, be curious and open-minded and passionate and determined and be humble. And, everything that Zappos did, we used those core values as strategies for everything we did. So getting into, holacracy and building teams and, giving employees the opportunity to find gaps and fill those gaps by, delivering whatever service it is that they felt was necessary to internal and external teams. The strategy was lean on those core values.
And this is again interesting because we hear lots of conversation about practices, about mechanics, about rules, about structural things. But at the end, what I'm hearing here is that if you start from the values, maybe you need practices, but at the end, people will live the values, and that will be the beacon for achieving extreme results. Because at the end, the reason for which Zappos has been acquired is because of this unique culture that you are mentioning, but also the business value that it generated. Are values really core? Do they come before the practices?
Absolutely. So culture and core values was really the foundation for everything that we did. With all the things that seemed to change, whether it was, the way we're doing business or, different services or products that we're offering to customers, everything was built based on our culture and core values. The idea being, if you had an organization of people who were really, happy and motivated and passionate about the work that they did, then they wanted to just, spread that to everyone else, including external customers.
At the core of these conversations, we use Hsieh as an example of, quite a brave experiment of implementing complexity into the organization design. And working as small teams that are semi-autonomous, that have lots of freedom, autonomy, but also reconnecting those teams to give coherence. Um, how does this sound in comparison to what you have seen in Zappos? What are some of the key areas on which Zappos has been experimenting for the last really 10 years?
So I mentioned holacracy. I feel like that was really the foundation that everything else was built on, related to building autonomous teams and some of the other work that we did in my last few years. Holacracy gave us a lot of terminology that was helpful. We started helping people understand what it meant to be self-organized and self-managed, and the concept of purpose and accountability. Those are really core to everything that you do. And so that helped us then kind of branch into other things. One of the main initiatives that I'm most passionate about, that I've now brought with me outside of the organization, is what I learned through building what we called market-based dynamics. And basically what that is helping teams operate more like micro businesses within the enterprise. So if Zappos is the enterprise, there's teams that live within it. They got the opportunity to truly kind of manage and deliver the products or services that they wanted to, as long as they lived within the three sides of what we call the triangle of accountability. Now, the triangle of accountability really just was like a guideline, and it was built, again, based off of the foundation of our core values and culture. But the three sides were culture and core values. So you had to differentiate based on culture, core values. You had to deliver the very best service. So that had to be a differentiator. And you had to basically pay the bills. What we called was like break even in our model using a P&L structure. So we had every team had their own P&L, and we kind of blew up a traditional budgeting system. So in a traditional organization, it's a top-down budget. It starts at the top and trickles down, if you will. You're also incentivized in a traditional organization to spend as much money as you can, so that you can get more money the next year, or at least the same amount. And that's not really how we live our day-to-day lives. In my personal bank account, I'm not trying to spend all the money I have there by the end of the year so that I could start fresh the next year. Like, that's just not something we do. So why not apply that thinking to an organizational setting where budgets are just basically a bank account? We literally called them your bank account. Every team had a bank account. In addition to that, every team had an opportunity to be a customer and be a service provider and be an investor. So what that means is we actually had service agreements between teams. So if I'm, a development team, I'm providing services to the, let's say, merchandising team to let them put their merchandise on the website. So there's a service agreement between those teams internally, so that that's where you're getting your money. We called that customer generated budgeting. And all of that was tracked using a homegrown system. And it gave teams the opportunity to reinvest in themselves, to grow their team. So if they wanted to charge more internally or externally, because we also allowed teams to sell their services externally, then they could reinvest the way that they wanted to. We also started experimenting with things like, team-based compensation, and being able to pay your teams what you feel like is necessary, but obviously you still had to pay the bills.
Let me stop here, because you raised so many points that I want to investigate. Thank you so much for that.
It's so exciting.
No, it's so exciting, and it's really resonating with what Hsieh is doing. So the first question is, were you aware about Hsieh, or has this emerged autonomously? Because there are really many point of contact. So I'm curious about that, first of all.
So yes and no. We, as a team, as a small team, we were aware, but not until after we started doing some of these things. In fact, we're like, we should go visit them. We should go talk to them and learn from them also. But we had already started. So it was after we introduced market-based dynamics in March of 2017 to the company. We started working on it prior to that as a team, but we officially announced this is what we're doing in March of 2017. In September of 2018 is when we introduced that triangle of accountability I was talking about and really leaned into the customer generated budgeting that officially went, live for all teams at the beginning of 2019. But it was kind of, right around then, I think, is when we started learning about Hire and what they were doing. I don't know why we didn't know before, but we didn't.
And I will come back to that. But a question I had is really at the team level. What's the structure of the team? Is the team really flat? Or did you have some roles based on holacracy? So the rep link, the lead link, the facilitator, secretary. How was the team organized?
So everyone had a role or more than one role on the team. And we did use the holacratic structure related to purpose and accountabilities. It wasn't quite as formal as holacracy in that by that time, we probably weren't using rep links to the same degree. We definitely used lead links. We definitely had someone facilitate, but it was at that point, we had been practicing holacracy for years. And so pretty much anybody could facilitate. So we did identify purpose and accountabilities and roles for each person on the team. Absolutely.
And what I heard basically is that each team had a P&L, right? So autonomy in terms of how to spend money, how to generate revenues. And yes. I know about a CFO tool, so a tool also software helping with that. Can you tell us a bit more about this level of autonomy and how to manage that?
So you mentioned the CFO tool, Circle Financial Overview. So basically that tool managed all the transactions between teams. And we could invoice teams, all of that was there. The P&L was very transparent. Every team had a P&L and every team could see everyone else's P&L. So if you charge something, if you went and spent $200 on lunch yesterday, I could actually go look at your team and see that. The thing that was important there, though, is that you also had charges to your team for your what we call people costs. So people cost was a calculation based on the percentage of time or people time you're spending in the team. It also had some overhead costs and benefits and payroll taxes. But we also built in a percentage of contribution profit. So basically, we baked in a profit requirement for every team. There's some debate about whether that was great or not, especially for small teams. But that's how we charged each team. And then you had to charge other teams for the services that you provided to them based on what your costs were. And that's where the trade-offs needed to happen and where the teams had the autonomy to make sure as long as you're paying your bills, you can do whatever you want. And we actually would say that you can do whatever you want. You can sell whatever services as long as it fits within that triangle of accountability and you're okay.
And that's also fascinating. You can sell, you can do whatever you want. And so another lesson that I'm bringing home is that the triangle, so if you want the soft part, is giving coherence to the amazing level of autonomy and freedom that the team has, more than strategy or policies or rules of any kind. On the other side, it's really unbelievable. could you really do whatever you want? No other limit, no other ask.
My favorite like pretend example is if you wanted to have a basket weaving company at Zappos, you could, because if it made money and it was the very best basket weaving company ever, because you're just amazing service, and it's basket weaving fits within the core values. It's not anything that's illegal or not appropriate or anything, and you could pay the bills because you have tons of customers. You could do that. Probably not realistic. That being said, what a lot of teams were able to do is experiment with different things. I mean, if you look at the last few years at Zappos took over a theater in downtown and on the Strip in Las Vegas. There's a Zappos theater. There's just some interesting businesses. The audio-visual team, for example, was able to go out and provide services to external people and grow their team. There's all just so many great examples. And one of my favorites is actually the Zappos Adaptive team that started in the early days of the Market-Based Dynamics initiative. But that came from a phone call from a customer expressing a need. One phone call turned into this amazing business to help people who have, adaptive needs. They have, either physical or mental, things that they're challenged with. And the Zappos Adaptive platform provides clothing, functional clothing for those people.
And again, that's another connection to higher. They say it's zero distance from customer, but really customer experience has been at the core of everything that Zappos did since the very beginning. Is rewarding, compensation, incentivization a need to achieve that? So to really convince colleagues to keep the customer at the center and benefit from that. So is money a tool for it? Have you got something like that? So the team, if the team is performing well, part of the profit is remaining within the team?
So yes, we were just starting to work with that when I actually left the organization, or more specifically, maybe when COVID became a reality for us. We really wanted to get to a place where teams could distribute the money however they wanted. But at the time that I left, teams were able to essentially, they had to pay the company back 50% of their additional revenue, let's say, but then they got to keep 50% of it for the team to invest however they wanted. We hadn't quite gotten to a point where they were able to bonus team members and truly give compensation, whatever made sense for them. We did have some small teams experimenting with that, but it hadn't gotten to the whole organization quite yet. I think, that's really where we wanted to go, because we did have that, that issue. I mean, we definitely had an advantage in having our core culture and core values so, ingrained in everybody, and the recruiting process and all of that, making sure the right people were there for the right reasons. It wasn't about money. It was definitely about some much higher purpose. But yes, I do think that's an important part. And, some teams, would want different incentives, and we wanted to provide that flexibility for them.
And another question I have is about strategy. In traditional organizations, you have this very strong layer at the top, more or less precisely telling people what to do, where to focus their money, their investment, their energy. What I'm hearing here is quite the opposite at the end, respecting some basic values and principles. You could do whatever you want. Did you have anything, maybe not really constraining, but pulling people towards some key aspects, some key areas, some key directions? Or at the end, was it really totally emergent?
A really good question. I have to think about it a little bit. I mean, there's definitely subcultures within the organization in that, for example, the merchandising department, those folks really wanted to do, provide different services and provide, very unique brands and things like that, that maybe wouldn't have otherwise made the cut. So maybe there was a focus on that. There were lots of experience teams. So we had the most amazing events and parties, and where we were able to bring people together in fun and unique ways, to build those relationships and to have those network opportunities. And they were able to kind of blow that up. If you think about the Zappos theater experience, that's I'm actually not even sure of the current status of that. However, the idea was those teams could bring it to external people who are coming to Las Vegas from all around the world and provide that wow experience where you're sitting, in a seat at a theater and you get all of your, things delivered to you. You could have your items that you purchase for, t-shirts and things mailed to you directly from there, just some new and different things. So I feel like everybody kind of dug into the areas that they were most interested and passionate about. And they were just able to really, really deliver that wow through service and make it whatever they wanted it to be. So I don't think it was in a specific direction other than really able to flourish in the area that they were interested in.
And again, this sounds really quite unique, quite a dream, an organization in which you can express yourself. We separately talked about DDOs, organizations that really focus on letting employees to develop themselves and to be challenged to do that. Is this bringing some kind of pressure on the individual in terms of being very proactive, being very entrepreneurial? Asking to hire, what we have seen is that they believe this is not for every individual. So at the end, you need to have some kind of cultural fit. And I know that Zappos also in the recruitment and onboarding process is very careful about that. To what extent is it working for everybody? And to what extent do you feel pressure in terms of the need to perform in certain ways when you have so much freedom?
So I also believe it's not for everyone. That being said, there's a place for everyone. So especially if you're on a team with people, you don't have to be the entrepreneur. We did introduce a program to help people kind of experience what it's like to apply an entrepreneurial mindset and to have a customer-focused mindset, which are two very key components of having an organization like this, is being able to take risk and things like that, identify value. I mean, there's just so much. And I think that's kind of how we introduced it to everyone, meaning you don't have to be the entrepreneur. You don't have to lead a team. You just have to find your people, and you can still be the very best, marketer or analyst or whatever it is. But you don't have to start something new and do anything different, especially, if you're with a team, everybody has their unique roles. You can carve out a role for you. There's still a need for people who, I'll just say it, want to be told what to do. It's like, here, we need you to do this. So I don't think that you have to be, entrepreneurial or think differently and want to really change the landscape of your organization in order to fit in. I don't.
Interesting, because this is probably a major difference with Dyer, but this brings me to the next question. What's the journey? What's the process if I want to come up with a new idea, with a new product, with a new service, with a new team? Who should I ask to in Zappos? Who is going to approve that? How is it going to look like?
That's a great question. So going back to the idea of, we had holacracy. We still introduced, and used the governance process so you can propose something. So you're going to look at the purpose statements for all of the teams and say, okay, where does this fit from a purpose perspective? Talk to those people. And then through the opportunity that we enabled with customer generated budgeting, essentially every team, and I mentioned this before, could also be an investor. So you could ask for, I'm making this up, $5,000 from a bunch of different teams to get people to invest in your new business idea. So that's one way of doing it. You could also go to someone who has a really big budget, your bank account balance, and you can say, hey, it looks like you have a lot of money in there, and I have this interesting idea. What do you think about it? So essentially you had to sell it, and you had to get investors. I mean, that's what we called it, was investment, in order to cover your people costs and then also your shared services. So you still had to, there's still, you still need IT and things like that, and facilities and, other service oriented teams.
Was it really so easy to get other teams on board? Sorry, meaning that if you had to contract services from other teams, was it that easy? No bureaucracy, no inertia, no resistance in getting that level of commitment from other teams? Because in traditional organization, what we see is that this is very difficult. You have silos, you have functions, you have power. Basically, you have walls between different teams, and especially for support functions, HR, IT, legal, it's very tough to convince them to behave as an entrepreneurial unit.
Yep. I mean, people are people. So yes, you're going to have those challenges. There's still some, politics and bureaucracy that exists. I don't think it completely goes away. But I think there's opportunity for, people to, again, to kind of crowdfund for some money. But through one of the programs that I helped bring to Zappos, we actually had this, it was 2.5 days of, people coming together with a business idea. At the end of the 2.5 days, you had to communicate it to a panel of investors. They were internal people. Generally, I tried to pick people who were able to invest if they wanted to, and then they could pitch and say, I would like this amount of money. So it was a way to kind of take yourself out of, the traditional day-to-day way the organization looks and operates, to go to kind of, a separate group of people to ask for money for a specific idea. So we did try to create those opportunities to be a bit independent and removed from, the politics and jockeying for, position or money.
And basically, if I want to create something new, you're telling me I need no approval from the CEO, no approval from any, council committee on the top. I just need to understand where this competence or idea is allocated through the organization design that in holacracy is transparent as well, and go and talk to them, right?
So yes, mostly. The part that changes it is if you want to create a team that supplies services to external people. So if you want to interact with people outside of the organization, let's say I want to sell organizational design services to you, a non-Zappos employee or company, let's say, there was an external, like a compliance process you had to go through. So you needed to get, some boxes checked from legal and from, PR and from HR and just like the compliance component, from a financial perspective, and make sure that things were aligned. So there were some processes. I mean, you could call it bureaucracy, but we really tried to create it to be the like minimum necessary. You don't get to judge the idea. You don't get to, if this person can show that they're going to be getting money and they have a contract, from an external person, and it's in line with our culture and core values, and you're delivering the very best customer service and the customer experience, then ultimately it's a yes.
And can you tell me a bit more about customer generated budgeting? What does it mean? How does it look like?
So every team had to put together a menu of services. So what services do you provide, and what's the cost for those services? So that's where we started as a baseline, is this is what we do. I mean, teams should be pretty clear about what they do. We kind of took it to another level and put it into the CFO tool so everybody could find, what services exist. And then based on that price, you would enter into a service agreement with whatever teams need your services. And then you're then a customer of other teams where you're wanting their services. So it creates this service provider customer relationship between all teams. At the beginning, we had, not as many teams had the money to give out. So it was a little bit more kind of block funding looking, but it didn't take very long for it to be much more networked. So it was a network budgeting system, basically. And, you had transactions between all service providers and customers. There were service agreements that outlined all kinds of things like the terms, there were milestones and expectations, review dates, end dates, things like that. But it is possible that there were teams that only had one customer. You're just getting your money from one place, which is really what a more traditional organization looks like. But what was great about the opportunity that presented itself through customer generated budgeting is it put all teams on the same playing field. So it wasn't like you're doing this or you're not. Actually, everyone's doing it because everybody had to do the same thing, which is identify their menu of services and get their revenue from at least one customer. And that's actually how we gauge the progress of the initiative, is through KPIs such as how many people have revenue, how many teams have revenue coming from more than one customer.
And this resonates a lot with what Amazon is doing, right? Having teams with the interfaces, APIs, connecting them and being adamant about what you give, what you get. So basically, everything is described in a way that can be used even through software by others. And a follow-up thought for me, again, based on Hsieh, is, have you found any need of having groups of teams establishing contracts? Hsieh has this concept called the enterprise micro community. It's really, taking a customer need, a customer scenario, and then using contracts to aggregate the multiple teams to provide different pieces or different services that are needed to achieve that outcome for the customer. Have you seen anything like that in Zappos?
We were not as advanced as that. There were a couple of people who were facilitating that. So, for example, someone who has a relationship with, some organization outside of Zappos that says, you maybe start the conversation with, oh, I'm looking for these types of services. And they're like, oh, we have a team for that. Oh, we're also looking for these types of services. Oh, we have a team for that. And then that person actually became, a consultant within Zappos, in that, he was able to then go to those teams and say, are you interested? We have an external customer. I can help facilitate this process and help kind of do the customer management. So you can keep doing what you do, but I'm going to develop that relationship and, be that conduit to that customer. And then there were contracts related to that. So yes, we definitely were starting in that direction. I don't think it was as mature as what you're describing, where teams just kind of organically come together. Not quite yet, but definitely in the future, yes.
Great. And another area that you touched upon, but it's really interesting for me, is the transition. And a lot has been written about Zappos transition to holacracy, maybe a bit less about market-based dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, any insight about that? And I realized that Zappos was already a unique company with a unique culture, with a unique leader. So in a sense, maybe it was easier, but I guess not that easy anyway to to go from a traditional structure to something that is very different from what most people had seen or had really expected to live in an organization. So any key thought about that, about transition, some lessons learned, something that you wouldn't do again?
I mean, of course, there's always lessons learned. I would say, I think it's really important to be clear about what you're trying to get. What is the outcome that you want to have? Because not everything is for every organization or every person. So what I think that holacracy gave us, as much as it hurt to introduce a very, very structured system in a very non-structured organization, there was a lot of pain there. There was a lot of like unlearning, relearning, there was some land grabbing. There was fear, all of the normal things that happen. They're still normal people. And so I would just say that, one lesson learned for me is you don't have to do everything at once. With holacracy, I think that's kind of the way they do it. But, related to once we, I would say evolved from the holacratic structure into building these autonomous teams and micro businesses, was we set the foundation of, the minimum viable requirement is you have to have your own P&L. You can keep doing business the exact same way as you want to until you're ready, or forever. That's okay. But it at least creates equal opportunity for all teams to be able to use the tools or the building blocks that exist to put them together in the way that you need or want to have a specific outcome. So that's what I would say is, like, break it down and understand what exactly you're introducing. Is it needed for does everyone have to do it? Yes or no? What outcomes are you looking to get from this? Is there a specific organizational structure that would help you get there? One of the things that my business partner and I do now is we help organizations focus on the individual, the team, and agreements between those. If you just start looking at that, making the implicit explicit, those are some really foundational things that then you can mix them up and put them together in whatever way makes sense for your organization. And don't just assume you have to do all or nothing. I also, obviously, prescribe to the idea of testing and learning, what's working, what's not working, but what's working for one team might not work for another team. And ideally, that should be okay.
And the transition to holacracy has been, as we can understand from your words, not really easy. It took quite a bit of time, and some people left. But then Zappos kept moving ahead. Why? What really generated the need for looking at market-based dynamic when, if compared to the market, holacracy was already ahead?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say that was because Tony was definitely a forward thinker. He was constantly pushing the envelope. He felt very strongly that we needed to disrupt ourselves before the market disrupted us. And, that was really it. I think just he was influenced by, the writing of Jeffrey West and the book Scale. How do we scale? How do we deliver, even better service and change the world through delivering, the very best service. And in order to do that and continue to be moving, we had to disrupt ourselves. Disrupt tends to have a negative connotation, and it is sometimes. It hurts and it's hard, it's scary, but at the same time, it's necessary to evolve. You know, that's what made us better. And yes, we lost some people. Those people, a lot of them went on to do amazing things outside of Zappos, and that's okay too. Like, that's exactly what we wanted, was to create an experience for people to learn and grow and realize, you know, what they want and what they don't want, and give them the tools and opportunity necessary to, you know, make a difference.
I see a failure point, you know, in many experiences. Maybe Zappos is one of them. The leader, the visionary leader, the strong culture at the end is a strong attractor, but also something that is difficult to protect in the long term, because at the end each one of us is unique. And Tony left lots of heritage, but it was Tony. And we have seen that in Hire, we have Jiang Guimin, again, a very strong leader. In Morningstar, you have Chris Ruffer is there, but the question is, what is going to happen when he's going to leave? Do you see a way to protect this value, this culture, this direction beyond the leader? Some organizations are thinking about steward ownership, for example, to really, you know, incorporate the purpose into an entity that is not depending on the leaders of the moment. Is there any thinking about that? How to really nurture, cultivate, protect, and scale what good has been done in Zappos, you know, beyond Tony or beyond the leader in any other organization?
Well, I think that everybody who has the opportunity to work with and be inspired by people like that then can, you know, that manifests itself in different ways. And it may or may not be with that organization. And I think that's what's going to make a bigger impact. I mean, ultimately, I decided to take what I experienced, and I wanted to make an impact in more organizations. So I was feeling like, okay, I've done all of this great work and, you know, had all of these challenges with really amazing people. I think that's definitely the things that I miss the most, are those people. But I get to then, you know, bring what I've learned and experienced to other people in other organizations and kind of, you know, plant those seeds there. And so I think, you know, maybe another question is that what we want? Does the organization still look the same way? You mentioned the steward ownership and things like that. I think that's definitely more progressive and something that my business partner and I are absolutely trying to do, is not build a big old company. I don't want to do that. In fact, the opposite. Let's just bring in, you know, amazing service providers and people to help organizations change the way they work, and, you know, ultimately make an impact in so many people's lives. Is that what the future of organizations are? I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure.
And this brings me to the last question. We talk a lot about purpose, you know, about impact, about helping others, delivering happiness. Do you believe that it is time for the business to take on a different role, a role that goes beyond maximizing shareholder value? Are we ready as a society to do that? Do we need that? Do we need leaders and businesses to stand up for something different? Is this something that is coming up with your own clients, with your conversations with the organizations you work with?
Yes. Just leave it there. Yes. So absolutely it comes up. I think especially as you consider the importance and I would say renewed intention around building diverse, inclusive, equitable organizations. We can use some of these things that, you know, we're doing in the organizational design and management science world And, that's how we get there. That's how we get to more diverse organizations and the steward leadership and things like that is, we're trying to have everybody, be the best that they can be and make the most impact and, have amazing outcomes for organizations. And I think it's a different role. And I don't think everybody's there. I don't know that every organization will get there, but I absolutely feel the movement in that direction from all over, even in the most traditional organizations that you wouldn't even think of.
Rachel, we are at the end of this conversation. Thank you so much for all of your insights and for sharing your experience. I think there is lots to learn and lots to take inspiration from, also maybe in more traditional organizations. So I think we can suggest that some of these ideas can be taken in small bites and tested tomorrow. And it seems we are both excited about building organizations that can really do more for the rest of the world, not just for their shareholders. So thank you so much for being with us today, and for all of you following us today. We are going to have another Rendanheyi masterclass. We are going to talk about some of these topics, and Rachel actually will be with us. So join us and join also Rachel to this other event. Thank you so much, Rachel. Talk soon.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great talk.
Thank you.
Bye.
Among the many insightful experiences and stories we heard about in our EEO conversation so far, Zappos' journey stands out as a unique experience for more than one reason. On one side, its trajectory is probably the closest to Hsieh's experimentation path towards increased levels of autonomy, power distribution, entrepreneurship, inclusion of market-driven principles within the organizational texture. The impressive commonalities between the Rendanheyi and Zappos market-based dynamics we discussed with Rachel include, first of all, an intentional unbundling of the firm through the allocation of entrepreneurial initiative to teams or circles at the edges of the firm. In addition to that, Zappos' holocratic structure and roles cemented self-management within teams, similarly to the three rights micro-enterprises benefit from in Hsieh. And autonomous profit and loss and high levels of decisional space are available both in circles and in micro-enterprises. And obsessive attention to customer experience and customer outcomes and customer scenarios is common to both stories. The ask for or silkworms or micro-enterprises to formalize and to expose a set of services with the related cost for others to acquire them is another similar aspect, such as also collaboration among circles or micro-enterprises through peer-to-peer agreements, such as the technological support that makes value exchanges and decisions visible to all actors, to all parties in the ecosystem, or a process and the possibility for entities to invest part of their money on the growth of their peers. In Hsieh, this is industry platforms. In Zappos, it's other micro-enterprises, other circles. And finally, commonalities also include a strong, charismatic visionary leader, Tony Hsieh and Mr. Jiang Guimin, nudging the system to reinvent itself before the pull from the market becomes too threatening, And finally, both journeys are really fluid and never-ending, evolutionary, trying to introduce new ideas and organizational answers in line with the needs from the market, but also the expectations from employees. Even with all of these commonalities, still the most surprising aspect we feel compelled to consider from Rachel's word is actually the different underlying environment, beliefs, and conditions in which such common design choices have been made. Zappos has significant roots in American culture, in its political dynamics, in its regulatory environment, and more specifically, in the vibrant hum of Las Vegas community. Its unique core values and culture really permeate the company and really are explicitly and operationally guiding as a beacon the capacity to attract, to inspire, to energize, to connect, and to guide action in everything the company does. Its business has been tied to the internet and e-commerce since the very beginning, and the products itself are different from white good appliances. The company size is much smaller, a few thousand people, not many tens of thousands. And while believing in an unlimited human potential and the role of organizations at unlocking it, Zappos doesn't expect all employees to act as CEOs or as entrepreneurs. Self-managed teams are seen as a valid complement, actually a necessity, to support individual drive and owners and entrepreneurs. And also Alacracy, it's a specific organizational model coming from the West, not from the East. And that's the model that represented the initial stepping stone of Zappos' evolution towards self-organization. And the last point is that Tony Hsieh had a different profile, different intellectual influences, different personal traits than Mr. Jiang Min. But these differences, these divergences only reinforce the mounting needs more and more organizations are facing that both Rendanheyi and the market-based dynamics in Zappos are addressing. The need to be nimbler in front of turbulent and hardly predictable forces playing out in the market. Doing that by infusing higher room for creativity, innovation, autonomy within the enterprise, realigning value creation streams around customer needs, customer scenarios, and customer interactions, engaging a broader ecosystem of external players, could be partners, suppliers, customers, even competitors, at swiftly developing newer, better, longer-term customer solutions. And finally, getting rid of internal bureaucracy, employee disengagement, organizational and technological debt, preventing the firm to thrive on new opportunities. These needs are really present in any country, at any company side, in any industry. So for the incumbents, for scale-ups, currently attracted by the outstanding results that the Rendanheyi enabled Air to achieve for more than 35 years, the comparison between Zappos and the Rendanheyi, the core of this conversation with Rachel, offers ample food for thought. If you believe applying principles and practices from the Rendanheyi beyond China is impossible, well, there is now proof this is not the case. If you are worried about the extreme levels of entrepreneurship and openness to risk required by the Rendanheyi, well, we now know how this lever can be appropriately modulated according to the specific context, even a context that is very far from the one that Hire has been benefiting from. If you're searching for fresh ideas about how to structurally infuse more accountability, more motivation, more creativity in your workforce, now the evidence is accumulating, is not just higher. And finally, if such a revolutionary journey seems too daunting in your company, your context, in your environment, in your culture, Rachel's final remarks stress the necessity, confirmed by Hsieh itself, to approach this as a marathon, not as a sprint. That means granting yourself the right time, the right space for critically experimenting, learning, and scaling more than copycatting an ready-made model, even the Rendanheyi. Please go ahead and listen to the full conversation with Rachel Murch, and then ask yourself, isn't it the time to start unbundling and rebundling your firm closer to customers? If the answer is yes, well, the trio and the Rendanheyi are definitely good inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you at the next EEO conversation.